I took the job because I wanted to be outside. No fluorescent rooms, no email, just ridge and fog and a truck full of maps. My name is Aaron Hale. I was 26, new badge, new boots, a man who thought a uniform might quiet the noise in his head. The Smokies are an old place that moves like water. Laurel, rhododendron, sourwood. On my first morning, Chief Lewis handed me a thin binder and smiled like it was a joke. "Learn the trails, learn the people, learn the rules," he said. The binder had the usual: fire restrictions, permit codes, rescue protocols. Tucked inside, folded into a small pocket, was another list. He tapped that page with his knuckle and didn't laugh. They were short, typed plain, and all in caps, the kind of instructions that do not invite argument. Do not whistle after midnight. Do not leave bread, crackers, or sugar on the rocks. Do not follow the lights you see between the rhododendrons. If someone calls your name from deeper in, do not answer. Report all odd tracks from small three-toed prints. If a hiker asks for the gorge route after sunset, direct them away. I read the rules by flashlight that first night, thinking they were charming superstition. I laughed the first week. I stopped laughing the second. My first midnight check was simple. The observation shelter had a fault light that needed reset. The ridge smelled of damp leaves. The fog sat in pockets like curtains. I walked with a headlamp and a radio, the binder in my breast pocket, like something I might need to hide. Halfway up, I heard whistling down in the drainage, off, random. A string of notes that had no business there at that hour. The rule in my pocket was a hot coal. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in the woods, but we are wired to help. I followed the sound and found a man on an overturned log with a cheap harmonica. He grinned at me like he'd been waiting for a passerby. He told me he and his friends had been bored and started the tune to scare each other. He smelled of beer and river mud. When I told him the rule, he laughed too loudly and edged to it and whistled again. The tune bent in the mist like a rumor. Above the drainage, pinpricks of light climbed between the rhododendrons. They were not headlamps, not fireflies. They moved in a deliberate line and blinked in a rhythm that was almost human. The man's smile died. He packed his things abruptly and left without the apology you expect when someone is told to be careful. 3 hours later, his friends called dispatch frantic. He hadn't returned to camp. After that, I stopped assuming the world was simple. The park has archives, old ranger logs, brittle photographs, notebooks written in the margins. I spent afternoons in the visitor center, flipping through yellowing pages. In a 1934 report, I read, 2 hunters lost between sunset and midnight, found hours later, eyes unseeing. I found a black and white photo where people's faces were weathered into shapes, a caption with a place name no one uses anymore. The old stories spoke of hill lights and a walking man, names that shifted county to county but carried the same sick civility, something in the woods that calls politely and waits patiently. The first sign was small, prints, not deer, not turkey, not raccoon, narrow impressions, 3 toes arranged in a crescent, stepping in a careful, precise line along the edge of a mossy rock. Beside them, white dust, powdery, like old bone, clinging to the creases of the moss. I traced those prints until my fingers stung from the cold. By dawn, the dust was on my truck's tailgate. It became part of the job to tell people no. Hikers annoyed at closed paths, parents who wanted the gorge route for photos. Some tried to charm me with stories of 1,000 visits. One family brought a drone and a picnic, the kids tossing bread to jays. I told them politely not to feed wildlife and to avoid the gorge after dark. The mother rolled her eyes and whistled between her teeth. Later, a hiker sent a photograph of a small shrine on a rock near the overlook. Stale bread, a plastic cup, stones arranged in a careful arc, no footprints beyond the maintenance path. Someone had left offerings and vanished back into the trees.
We burned the bread. The smell was sweet and wrong.
That night, someone placed a small red cup on my windowsill. June was a volunteer who loved night photography. She read naturalist websites like Scripture and wanted frames for a gallery. I told her gently to avoid the deep loops. Trail 9, I told her, was closed after dusk. She smiled and said she trusted her gear. She went anyway. Her radio call was a ragged whisper. "There are lights. They're not like fireflies." Then static. We found her camera on a tripod, lens low to the ground, its card full of black frames and tiny points of light. In one frame, a smear resolved into something long and thin, a curve of teeth like a seam in the dark. Her boots were aligned as if she'd been kneeling. Her pack was zipped and untouched. June was not there. We searched for hours. Dogs refused to cross a bush line. Their tails tucked, they sat down and would not go further. By the ridge, we found a single shoe, a footprint matching the three-toed crescent and the flowery dust. The evidence locker later held June's camera like a mute witness. Her last timestamp was 21:59, 11 minutes after I logged her as having been denied access. The park changed after June. Patrols doubled. We posted more signs, taped barriers across trails, and briefed volunteers until their eyes glazed. Scientists in vans came and went, taking notes in clipped pantomime, asking for permission to set cameras. Lawyers called meetings and drafted press releases that would never explain why we closed Trail 9. Locals brought talismans and told old tales in our mess hall, their voices low, like prayer. A preacher swore he'd seen lights walking across the fog, like a funeral with lanterns. A retired ranger brought in a 1958 journal where someone had written in looping ink, "They learn language in the silence." We tried logic. Cameras and audio recorders went into the roots along Trail 9, camouflaged beneath ferns and stones. For days, nothing happened. Then, at 03:03 on a rainless night, every recorder registered 3 small ticks in perfect chorus. Then a voice, layered, inhuman, arranging syllables that sounded almost like our own language, but were wrong in a way your tongue knows before you do. The transcription came out garbled. Name, home, follow, leave. One of the volunteers walked toward the microphone, eyes glassy, hands outstretched. We pulled him back. The footage showed a figure at the edge of the rhododendron, face narrow, mouth a seam, turning its head as if listening for an answer. Insects rose from the understory and formed a faint clock face above it for a heartbeat. Dr. Mallory, an anthropologist we'd called in, said what we feared. The sounds were mimetic. They learned by copying. She used a word that felt like a verdict, colony, something that copies, then rehearses, then uses the copy as bait. More unnerving was what turned up in private pockets. A volunteer who'd pulled back from the mic had in his jacket a scrap of paper with 3 numbers written in a child's scrawl: 0214, 0303, 2159. The sequence fit like a cold puzzle, indexes of time a hand had left on the world. We tried to bargain with noise. Speakers played human chatter and recorded calls at the shrine sites to break the rhythm, to make the mimicry useless. The lights hovered just beyond and did not come. We left offerings of our own, dead leaves, stones, the bread we burned in a bucket. The food would vanish by morning. A deputy, furious and exhausted, left a toaster with bread in it as a decoy. The next day, the ranger station reeked of wet ash. The bread was gone, and the toaster's wiring had been tweaked as if someone had licked at it with tiny teeth. Men began to change in small ways. People on the ridge who had once been steady developed habits. One man hummed without realizing it. Another began leaving pennies in bowls at graves without knowing why. 2 people came back from loops and could not remember a child's face. One woman began to whistle in her sleep. The park was teaching them, or stealing away pieces and returning them malformed. Then I made the worst mistake I ever confessed. I chased the lights. It was a foolish thing, an arrogance born of rules and resentments. I thought if I outpaced the pattern, I could break it. I should have known better. I followed a faint glow between the trunks, the beam of my flashlight clumsy against the rhythm of their dance. I whistled once, half mocking, a single stupid note. The world moved. The lights answered, matching my tone like mirrors. My radio filled with voices I did not know. Time folded. A few minutes became 2 hours in the space between breaths. I woke up on the other side of the ridge with my radio dead and a bruised wrist. My watch had 2 hours missing. I woke with a name on my tongue that was not mine and could not recall learning. For 3 days, I could not remember the smell of my wife's hair. Chief Lewis did what chiefs do. He made the hard, quiet choice and handed me his badge and told me to go home for a week. I drove as if I could leave the place under my skin. I slept in motels and tried to forget the rhythm. But you cannot unlearn the way a place has learned you. When I returned, the office felt alien, like someone had been moving about while I was away. The cup on my windowsill was gone. The flowery dust had reappeared on my truck. June's camera case sat in evidence, its zip stubborn. The badge fit like cold iron in my palm and pulled at me with its weight. I realized that being a ranger here stopped being a job and became a role the land wanted me to fill. It required me to remember the rules and to enforce them, even when enforcement felt like a bargain. We closed Trail 9 with bright tape and signs that cited erosion and safety. Tourists grumbled and took their photos elsewhere. Officials wrote reports that said nothing about lights or flowery dust or mimicry. We told the public that the closure was for safety. That was true, and it was not the whole truth. 2 people came back changed enough that their families kept them out of the spotlight. They wandered at night, counting under their breath, tapping rhythms with their thumbs. One man left pennies in a line at a cemetery gate and smiled when the caretaker scolded him. Another hums at the grocery store now and starts when a child whistles. I keep the binder. I keep the thin page folded and stained where my thumb has pressed it countless times. I nail the sign into a sourwood tree when snow allows, and I check that it hasn't been taken down. I do not whistle after midnight. I do not leave food on the rocks. I refuse to follow lights between rhododendrons. I do not answer when something calls my name from deeper in. People ask why we close trails and why hikers should obey. They ask as if they seek rules for convenience. The truth is harsher and smaller and harder to sell. Some rules are not for the land. They are for us. They are agreements written in a place where myth and habit overlap, and breaking them has a cost. If there is a lesson here, it is not romantic. The Smokies do not need our explanations. They have their own tempo and their own appetite. We kept a list because once you know the pattern, you are responsible for it. We warn because people can be stubborn and because the land remembers what you forget. I am a ranger. I keep a list. I keep the sign. I keep watch. Some rules are not about saving the trees or the salamanders. They are about keeping us from being taken apart and taught back to the dark.